What is up, everybody? It's Animac here for AnimeUproar, and today I will be talking about a new anime that began airing in the summer 2019 season, and an anime that a lot of people have been talking about. As someone who hasn't read the manga, I came into the Dr. Stone anime with a completely blank slate, and although some people that I know and respect have praised the manga in the past, I honestly had no idea what to expect. I thought the first episode was interesting enough, but it didn't exactly dazzle me. It set up an intriguing world, but for all I knew at the time, the entire rest of the series could have just been Senku and Taiju going full Bear Grylls Man vs. Wild for like a dozen episodes. However, as soon as I saw episode 2, and especially the ending of episode 2, I was hooked. Some of the best anime that I've seen, including Death Note, Code Geass, and Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, really managed to impress me and hook me on that second episode. This is because these anime use the first episode to introduce us to the world and the characters, and then right in episode 2 they introduce a fundamental and compelling conflict that keeps us coming back for more. With that said, there will be some spoilers in this video up to the end of episode 2 of the Dr. Stone anime, but nothing beyond that. In the case of Dr. Stone, the primary conflict introduced in episode 2 is a fundamental clash of ideas. It is a radical conflict of philosophies between Senku, the genius scientist and pragmatist, and Tsukasa, the physically overpowered radical idealist. This conflict doesn't only set up a rivalry between two characters, it sets up a rivalry between two completely different philosophies and outlooks on life. And in the unique setting of the Stone world, this philosophical rivalry becomes the driving force of the entire plot, at least at these early stages of the story. After spending 3,700 years in a petrified state that appears to be some form of cryostasis, childhood friends Senku and Taiju wake up to find that they are seemingly the only living humans in a world that has been completely reclaimed by nature. All other people are seemingly still petrified, cities, modern technology, and society as a whole have completely disappeared, and all around them, Senku and Taiju find themselves in a world that has been thrust all the way back to the Stone Age. This is a pretty daunting situation to find yourself in, but Senku does not despair. He puts his genius science skills to work in order to figure out how to de-petrify the other humans and bring back modern society as quickly as possible. Senku says that humanity spent 2 million years getting from the Stone Age to the modern age, but Senku wants to speed up that process. Senku believes that science can explain everything, including the mysterious and outright fantastical mass petrification phenomenon. But he acknowledges that science is a slow process that requires a lot of experimentation, a lot of trial and error. As Senku says, science is just a name for the pain-in-the-ass process of looking at the root causes of everything and how it all comes together. And despite the fantastical nature of the mass petrification, Senku boldly proclaims, "I am going to beat fantasy with science." Although Senku's friend Taiju is primarily driven by the desire to rescue Yuzuriha, the girl that he has been in love with for years, Senku and Taiju generally seem to be on the same page when it comes to their desire to rescue as many people as possible and bring back modern society to the greatest possible extent. However, major complications arise right in episode 2. Using the incredible power of science and bat waste, Senku figures out a formula that allows him to de-petrify the other humans. Senku and Taiju have only a limited amount of the substance at first, and they decide to use it to de-petrify Yuzuriha. But after they are attacked by lions in the wilderness, lions who are seemingly descendants of the lions who escaped Japanese zoos after the mass petrification, Senku and Taiju are forced to de-petrify someone else first, the strongest fighter in their former high school, Tsukasa. As insanely overpowered as Senku is intellectually, Tsukasa is equally overpowered physically, and he is able to take down and kill a lion with a single punch. At first, everything seems to be going well between the three characters. Tsukasa is extremely grateful to Senku and Taiju for rescuing him from his stone state, and in return he promises to hunt for them and protect them while Senku uses his scientific genius to help them establish a functional mini-society. However, by the end of episode 2, the honeymoon is already over as Tsukasa and Senku realize that they have completely different and inherently opposing goals for their new society. Senku's decision to try to bring back modern society and save everyone he possibly can makes sense to us at first glance. But it is important to understand that this is not a politically neutral decision. Senku is making several assumptions when he decides to do his best to bring back society to where it was before the petrification. He is assuming that modern society was something positive, something just, and something that should be emulated once again in the stone world. In this sense, Senku's philosophy could be described as conservative. Now, I don't mean conservative in the sense of any specific political party or political agenda, but rather in the way that a political philosopher like Edmund Burke might understand conservatism. Senku is assuming that modern society as it was before the petrification was a good thing, that there is a reason why society evolved the way it did in the first place, and that the best course of action is to model this new society on the old one. On the other hand, Tsukasa has a very different view of the stone world. Tsukasa believes that modern society as it was before the petrification was unjust and corrupt in many ways. Tsukasa doesn't want to bring back society to the way it was. He wants to change it for the better. Tsukasa says, "We're free in this stone world. Shells never belong to anyone. The same goes for the sea and the land." Tsukasa believes that if they tried to bring back everyone and restore society to the way it was, this would lead to conflict over property and money, and eventually this would result in war and suffering. Tsukasa wants to avoid this by starting anew. Tsukasa believes that the only way to start fresh is to take a very radical step. He wants to bring back to life only the young, the children and the youth, and he wants to get rid of all the adults. By the way, when someone's body is broken while they are in their petrified state, they die for real and they cannot be revived again. If natal etch or natal etch, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but it's the substance that depetrifies people, is poured on people who have been smashed in their stone form, these people will simply become corpses. They are already dead. And this is exactly what Tsukasa begins doing. He begins smashing the petrified adults that he comes across. And he doesn't make a distinction between adults who are bad people and adults who may be good people, and who may be completely innocent of any wrongdoing. Tsukasa simply begins to kill the adults indiscriminately. As soon as Senku witnesses Tsukasa's immense strength, he immediately understands how dangerous Tsukasa is. In a world with no organized society, those who are physically strongest get to decide everything. Might makes right. If you are weaker, you are at the mercy of the stronger, and this is the exact situation that Senku and Taiju find themselves in. Senku and Taiju do not approve of Tsukasa's philosophy and his decision to kill the adults, but they cannot stop him physically. Not unless Senku can use his scientific genius to create weapons that will be capable of overpowering Tsukasa. That is exactly what Senku sets out to do, and the conflict between these two drastically different philosophies begins. While I obviously disagree with Tsukasa's actions because he takes it upon himself to kill all the adults, whether they are good people or bad people, his philosophy is indeed very interesting, and it is deeply rooted in the political philosophy of our own non-stone world. A couple of years ago, I wrote and successfully defended a PhD dissertation that focused primarily on Jean-Jacques Rousseau, one of my favorite philosophers and someone whose critique of modern society has many parallels to the ideas put forth by Tsukasa. In his famous work called The Discourse on the Origins of Inequality Among Men, Rousseau argues that man is by nature good, innocent, and compassionate. Rousseau says that before organized society was established, back in a time when all human beings basically just lived off the land like nomads, there was no war or suffering. Every human being took only what they needed to survive, and they never had any reason to take more than they needed or to steal from others. In this state of nature, before the rise of organized society, human beings were unequal in terms of natural things like physical strength and intelligence, but they were not unequal in terms of wealth or social privilege because those things did not exist. Rousseau imagined the natural man as something akin to an animal. If two hungry squirrels climb up the same tree and go for the same nut, only one will come away with the nut in the end. But the other squirrel will not get mad or hold a grudge against the squirrel that took the nut. The squirrel that didn't get the nut will not go back to its squirrel friends and organize a posse in order to start a war against the other squirrel. The squirrel that didn't get the nut will simply move on and look for another nut, and the so-called conflict will end there. Rousseau imagined natural humans to be similar to this. They took only what they needed to survive. They had no reason to take more than they needed, especially since if they tried to take too much, it would just spoil anyway. And so there would never be any reason for humans to hold grudges against each other, much less to go to war against each other. Nevertheless, as soon as human beings started living in organized society, everything changed. Instead of living free and independent lives, humans started depending on each other and competing with each other. They created private property, they created money, they created social status and rank, and they began competing with each other for these things. They started taking more than they needed, even if that meant that other people would have way less than they needed for bare survival. And this was the origin of all inequality and corruption in modern society. Rousseau says the following: "The first man who, having enclosed a piece of ground, bethought himself of saying, 'This is mine,' and found people simple enough to believe him, was the real founder of civil society. From how many crimes, wars, and murders, from how many horrors and misfortunes might not anyone have saved mankind by pulling up the stakes or filling up the ditch and crying to his fellows? Beware of listening to this impostor. You are undone if you once forget that the fruits of the earth belong to us all, and the earth itself to nobody." So according to Rousseau, the first person who created private property instead of behaving as if the entire earth belonged to everyone equally was the true founder of civil society. And this is what eventually leads to all of the unfairness and inequality in the world. Now compare what Rousseau said to Tsukasa's words. When talking to Senku about Senku's plan to bring back everyone, including the adults, Tsukasa says the following: "They'll be grateful to you at first, but as soon as civilization returns, the rich and powerful seniors will say, 'That used to be my land, pay your rent, pay your taxes.' They'll rob the poor youth of our future again. We must not bring that world back. This is a stone world, an untainted paradise. We'll revive only the pure-hearted youth and live in a natural world owned by no one. It's a chance to purify humanity." Essentially, Tsukasa wants to bring back Rousseau's natural man, the innocent and primitive man who existed before the creation of modern society. Senku obviously disagrees, as he is a technology-loving boy who gets excited over mechs and space and stuff like that. He vows to use the power of science to rescue every single person. This sets up a fascinating philosophical dichotomy, and of course I was hooked as soon as I saw all of this take shape at the end of episode 2. But let's dig a bit deeper. The thing about Rousseau is that he fully acknowledged that his natural man, who is free, innocent, and uncorrupted by modern society, probably never actually existed. Or if he did exist, there is no way to prove it. Rousseau's idea of the state of nature is a thought experiment. He uses this concept of the state of nature and natural man to prove that modern society, as it is right now, is inherently unfair and corrupt. But he states clearly and directly that humanity cannot go back to the natural state. We cannot return to a point in history where society does not exist. Because of this, Rousseau wants us to do our best to make our current society more just and more free. Rousseau does not advocate for the abolishing of private property, and he does not claim that human beings need to go back to living like nomads. Instead, he says that even though living in an organized society has many challenges, it also gives us many new opportunities that we couldn't have even dreamed of in a more primitive state. And so Rousseau goes on to advocate for things like direct democracy and a common sense of national identity as ways of creating a more just society where people live together but also help each other and treat each other fairly. Rousseau's ideas were extremely influential in the 18th century, and they had a massive impact on the French Revolution and other historical movements that wanted to do away with absolutism and establish a more democratic system of government. But unlike Rousseau, other political thinkers who came after him did advocate for the abolishing of private property and the complete overthrow of the current economic system. This includes Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, and other thinkers that we have come to associate with the ideology of communism. People like Marx argued that we could not create a more fair and just society unless the existing economic structure was done away with completely. And this includes abolishing private property as we know it. Without getting too much into Marx's historical materialism, it is sufficient to say that Marx believed in the concept of class struggle, the idea that there are two main classes of people in modern capitalist societies: the poor majority, known as the proletariat, and the rich minority, known as the bourgeoisie. According to Marx, the rich minority is exploiting the poor majority, and these poor workers have become alienated from the products that they produce, from the act of production itself, from other workers, and even from their very essence as human beings. Eventually, the poor majority will rise up, overthrow the wealthy bourgeoisie, and all private property will be replaced with communal property. This will lead to true equality, and eventually class distinctions and even national boundaries will wither away as people learn to live together in communal harmony. After Marx's death, communist revolutionaries like Vladimir Lenin in Russia took inspiration from Marx, but they also modified his philosophy to fit their own needs and circumstances. They sought to put Marx's ideas about overthrowing the bourgeoisie into practice, and in the pursuit of this goal, they were willing to do radical things. And this includes killing many innocent people who just happen to have been born into the upper echelons of society, or who happen to oppose the ideology of Lenin and the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks were willing to kill innocent people in the name of what they considered to be a greater goal, what they saw as the greater good of establishing a classless communist society. And look no further than the fate of the Romanov children if you want to know just how far these communist revolutionaries were willing to go. Tsukasa shares some clear parallels with this type of revolutionary radicalism. Like Rousseau, Tsukasa believes that society corrupts human beings, and because they lived in this corrupt society for a longer period of time, adults are more corrupt than the youth. For this reason, in order to create a more just and fair society, Tsukasa believes that we need to start anew, and we must start with the youth who have not yet been fully corrupted by the evils of modern society. Rousseau never believed that this type of return to a more pure existence was possible, and he did not advocate for it. But Tsukasa sees the stone world as the perfect opportunity to do just that. Furthermore, like the radical revolutionaries of the past, Tsukasa is willing to commit radical acts of violence in the name of his cause. Tsukasa is willing to end the lives of millions of adults, regardless of whether or not they are good people, because he believes that the greater good of establishing a more pure and just society justifies this sacrifice. Senku disagrees, of course, and the battle between Senku's scientific genius and Tsukasa's physical prowess also becomes a battle between Senku's pragmatic conservatism and Tsukasa's revolutionary radicalism. I find this conflict to be absolutely fascinating, and even though I side with Senku and I can't possibly support Tsukasa's actions, I am intrigued by Tsukasa's philosophy. The petrification that lasted 3,700 years completely changed the world, and these radically different circumstances inspired Tsukasa to embrace radical action in order to create what he believes to be a new and better world. We can all agree that modern society has too much corruption and injustice, so we can see where Tsukasa is coming from even if we reject his methods. Just like we can agree with Light Yagami that the world has too much crime and evil, even if we don't support his mass murdering methods. And this is precisely what makes for a great anime conflict. Even if you reject the villain's methods, you can still understand and perhaps even relate to some of the villain's motivations. This type of conflict makes you think. It makes you reevaluate your own positions, and it makes you wonder what you would do if you suddenly found yourself in such a radically different situation. And I love that in an anime. I really enjoy anime series that put so much thought into their conflicts, and these are the types of stories that really stick with me. Whether it's Psycho Pass, Code Geass, Death Note, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, or Dr. Stone, I love an anime that makes me think about politics, philosophy, and the pros and cons of modern society. Dr. Stone really is deeper than it appears at first glance, and I can't wait to learn more about this stone world and the apocalyptic philosophy that lies just beneath the shonen surface. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos like this one, you can leave a like to let me know. And if you're new to AnimeUproar, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. I want to give a huge thank you to all of our AnimeUproar patrons for supporting our work and making our work possible. A special thank you to all of our Pro Hero tier patrons, including the one and only Gilgamesh, Nothing But a Fan, Jason Wilson, King Zeldris, and Angel Cruz. Another massive thank you to our The One tier patrons, the ones who stand above all other clans, including Baby Ray, Ace, Ingrata, Alolanadam, Maddie Mac, Makotakun, and Keelan. And finally, at the very pinnacle of interdimensional greatness, a tier reserved only for legends. A massive thank you to Reagan Harrison and Lord Noxanor, disciples of Lord Twigo himself. If you feel that our content provides value for you and you want to support more, be sure to check out our Patreon, link in the description. Even a single dollar will give you access to our Patreon exclusive Discord, and your name will appear in our videos along with these amazing people. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, see ya, Space Cowboys.